In the preceding two videos, we have looked at the significant difference when winding down a manufacturing company and winding down a bank. What is the lesson we have learned from this? When manufacturing companies become insolvent, all the assets can be sold off, even at a loss, turned into cash, and the liability holders can be paid off. The net loss is taken by the equity shareholders. If you remember, in the example we did earlier of a manufacturing company, loss taken by the shareholders was 700 currency units against their equity investment of 1000 currency units. They got back only 300 currency units, or 30% of their investment. Unfortunately, when banks become insolvent, it is not such an orderly shutdown as we saw in the earlier example. Why did the bank become insolvent? Because the quality of assets deteriorated, non-performing loans, mark-to-market loss on investments, etc. Such impaired assets are difficult to liquidate, i.e., they cannot be turned into cash. Hence, the liability holders, including the deposit holders, have to take the loss. That peculiar situation is what makes banks very, very different to manufacturing companies. Banks and financial institutions that manage financial assets, therefore, are intrinsically more complex institutions. And more importantly, any failure of one institution could have a contagion effect on the entire financial system, as we saw in the 2008 financial meltdown that started in the United States. You will recall Lehman Brothers, which used to manage large financial assets, was declared bankrupt, which meant it became insolvent, and which also meant that several institutions in the United States and across the world were taken down with it, and that had a serious macroeconomic fallout. Compare this to a large dominant manufacturing company going insolvent. That event is unlikely to affect the rest of the manufacturing companies in that ecosystem. However, if a bank goes down in a financial system, the entire financial system and all the other banks and institutions which deal in financial assets in that financial system will be impacted. Perhaps even institutions which are in other parts of the world. And that is where the macroeconomic fallout could get extremely unwieldy. Hence, the imperative need to regulate banks and financial institutions. We have institutions like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency in the United States, the Monetary Authority and central banks and regulators in every country, such as the Bank of England in the United Kingdom, the Bundesbank in Germany, the Bank of Japan, and in emerging economies like India, the Reserve Bank of India, and so on and so forth. The primary responsibility of these regulatory institutions is to regulate the financial asset companies and ensure prompt corrective actions so that the failure of one institution does not adversely impact the liability holders or the entire financial system in that country. Regulators ensure that financial asset companies that fail or are on the verge of failure are either merged with other financial institutions or recapitalized. And of course, to protect depositors, most countries have deposit insurance institutions who pay off depositors in whole or in part in the event the institutions holding their deposits become insolvent. I hope you've understood the significant complexity in running organizations that manage financial assets vis-a-vis institutions that manage real assets. What we will do in the next session is to look at how and why are financial markets different from product markets, in just the same way as we saw in these sessions how and why are banks and financial institutions different from manufacturing companies.